there, guys. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm John, here for John Chen Out to the World, and I wanted to be able to discuss today something that continues to captivate the mainstream narrative around queer LGBTQ issues. And this matters because so many colleges, universities around the country, especially those utilizing, which is practically every institution, mainstream educational institution, is utilizing this type of theory called queer theory. In Helen Pluckrose's book, Cynical Theories, they bring up this concept of critical theorists, which appeared in the 70s and particularly 80s from Marxist thought and postmodernism. And so with postmodernism, it was a critique of what modernism was. Modernism came from the Enlightenment discourse. So these include people like Freud and those types of existential thinkers like Nietzsche. And these Enlightenment thinkers brought on this age of modernism where we believe that, and many people still believe, I would say, if we just continue to progress with science, we will know everything that there needs to be known or foreseeably known about our existence through science, through discourse, through ontological research. If we can just continue to break down the elements, break down to the subatomic level, we can understand what the world is comprised of. And if we can even do it on a social level, then great, we can understand how social society works. Helen Pluckrose and her co-author write about critical theory as a means of being able to apply postmodernism. Postmodernism is a critique of modernism. So essentially, postmodern thinkers don't believe that you can actually arrive at truth in the same way that we look at chemicals in a beaker. We observe the archaeological finds of the past as a paleontologist does. Rather, we as constructivists, we as postmodernists are social constructivists. And so constructivism is an idea that comes alongside of it. So hold on to your seats here. I know there's a lot of lingo and jargon here, but it's important to know the basis of which our society has really turned upside down. Because what we thought once was the modernist thinking that we can actually derive truth by looking at particles and chemistry reactions and the physiological framework of human anatomy. We are breaking that down slowly, as we see in the modern day contemporary rhetoric of postmodern thinking, particularly on steroids, called critical theory. Critical theory is comprised of many different theories, whether it be feminist critical theory or queer theory. It is basically assuming that what we've been told about tradition in modernism, that science can derive and be reduced to these parts, whether it be elements or it be these basic physiological interactions, and that biology or neuroscience can derive some very brute fact reality, which is realism in a sense. Realism is very much akin to modernism, akin to reductivist types of science types of research. So when we have gone away from this belief that we can actually understand reality and that we need to actually look at ourselves as introspective observers of reality. So this is very quantum as it relates to social anomalies, gender especially being the most relevant, or race as being another relevant framework. When critical race theory came on the scenes, especially in the last 5 years or so, it came from the legal framework of critical race, where we believe that justice was biased towards people who are privileged and those who are oppressed, namely Black people in America. In the same way, critical race theory has branched off into feminist critical race theory and queer theory, where it's been really, really subjecting the traditional frameworks of modernism, especially sex, and critiquing it into its bits of what actually is gender. Simone de Beauvoir talks about the female sex as actually functions of behavior taught by society, and not so much from a biological framework. So we have feminism believing in a biological reality of womanhood, but nowadays we are deconstructing it so far from being women are innately different from men to a point where men and women are equal in the sense that they can do everything. So it's a very puzzling reality that we're living in, a sway of the pendulum from one extreme to another, that men and women are vastly different. And I think somewhere in the middle, we can all arrive to truth, which is that men and women share a lot of commonalities, whether in temperament, in neurochemistry, in biology, but also some extreme differences, especially when you consider the fact that men are stronger in terms of torso strength and grip strength, which leads to male boxers who want to transition dominating other women in women boxing or MMA. So there are practical elements that we can understand from a theoretical level, and particularly for myself and the audience here, to understand why I continue to have these discussions around gender, sex, and race. Especially as someone who's Christian, I believe in ultimate truth. You can't, namely, pinpoint a truth or a framework for truth without God, an authority that is higher than you. And science can't do that. We can't look at molecular chemistry. We can't understand morality just by looking at how the astronomical bodies and cosmological bodies function. Like, they can't tell us that. I mean, if you believe in astronomy, astrology, and as akin to some type of superficial superstition, in my opinion, about how people operate based on celestial bodies, then go for it. But for me, I truly believe that morality can only be derived from a pre-logical and pre-scientific framework, namely that of God, that something had to begin from this creation and that it had to be moral. It had to be something that was intentional. There's an intention behind everything that we do, whether it is creating a family, whether it's starting a new job. And that intention by design has a need. And in our society, in our culture, we have a lot of different needs for what makes a man or a woman. Today, we are so confused about what masculinity and femininity are because we have blurred the lines. And ultimately, as a Christian, I propose this idea that men are men and that women are women. Not to say that there isn't such an anomaly as intersex, but that is a disorder of sexual development, as it has always been deemed as such. And when we consider now where we are in the postmodern age of critical race theory, of critical theories in general, whether it be feminist, critical theory, or queer theory, we have broken down what tradition has taught us. And I believe that tradition was right. That tradition was hard. It was built on different references, evidence of human behavior, of human conception, and that it is rooted ultimately in a Judeo-Christian worldview as well. If the Bible has anything to say about reality, there is a God, there is a moral reality out there, but it also has to be confined within the physical reality. Romans 1, especially if you look at the New Testament, we find ourselves reading line after line about how creation speaks of the glory of God and that there is a designer, there is a purpose behind creation. If we didn't believe in that as a nihilistic atheist to one extreme or just a agnostic humanist, we come to the face of the issue of where does the line stop in terms of what is moral and what isn't moral. And I talk about this in length about how different societies across different times, such as America here in the 1700s, we believed in really are founded in an economy of racism and segregation, slavery, namely. That those who are privileged were predominantly white versus those who didn't have, who were black. And nowadays, that narrative has carried over, especially within this breeding ground of civil rights, black-white discussion of equality, and that of man and women. Without the sexual revolution, without the civil rights era revolutions of the 60s, we would have never gotten to this point today, where critical race theory in the 70s, in the bourgeoisie of the 70s and 80s, talking about postmodern thought, how we as a society cannot remain in a place where everything was stagnant, that man was supposed to do one thing and that women were supposed to do another. And it was already a ball rolling, a snowballing effect of the movements of the past, the second wave feminism, as well as the civil rights era. Bell Hooks talks about how there are victors, and victors get to determine what history is. They get to decide what the narrative is. And there are a lot of people in critical race theory as well as queer theory who suggest that we as practitioners Doctors, lawyers, as government officials need to look at histories from a critical lens to see that it wasn't the minority that was speaking, but rather the majority. And this is an interesting point that is relevant on many different levels. One, theologically, and secondly, socially. Truth has a form of pressure to it. Truth has a form of power behind it. Because truth is a narrative, truth has implications from the intention of the writer, the author, and theologically speaking, if there is a God, whether that is the case or not, whether you believe in a God or not, you have to believe that something overrides personal preference, something overrides our own desires. Because if I desire to steal, who's to say that you are more right if I stole from you? If I cheated on you with your wife or your husband? These are questions that every society had to answer. Most societies have come to a average accumulated knowledge and wisdom about morality. And so it has to be there in some sense, a line that can be distinguished. But we cannot say with absolute certainty, apart from logic and faith, that logically, if there is a God, then we have to bow down to that God, that there is a power in that God. Whether it's a government, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a parent, there is power in that authority. And it's not simply us being authority to ourselves. So where does that land us today, especially when we're talking about gender dysphoria, sexuality, being Christians in an age that's postmodern and post-Christian? I believe that we need to be able to discuss these things at length, especially as it pertains to critical race theory, especially as it pertains to the very cynical types of theories that Helen Pluckrose writes about in her book, Cynical Theories. We have done away with tradition. We have done away with this conception of what man and woman is. And now it's whatever you can make of it. There are such things as non-binary, as pronouns that go up to 100 or 200 different lengths and degrees. You can be whatever you want because we are an authority to ourselves. And when we have become a pluralistic postmodern society, we get to decide what good and evil is based on our own tastes and preferences. There is no moral authority that really overrides. Other than that, I would say, especially as a product of immigrant parents from communist China, that of Marxism. Marxism found its roots as well in a post-capitalistic society. And Marx found that those who had were essentially evil. He equated them as not merciful or virtuous, and certainly that could be the case. But ultimately, when life is reduced to those who have versus have not, there comes to be a lot of issues and problems. Particularly when people are disenfranchised, they will revolt. And we see that whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement in recent years here in America, or the Pride movement, the LGBTQ community, they are eviscerating themselves at length because a gay man will misgender somebody who turns out to be trigendered. Trigender is this really new concept of being someone who is non-binary, male and female, all at the same time. We are coming up with new ideas of what it means to be human, what it means to be outside of the bounds of tradition. And ultimately, tradition has some correlation with reality, something that connects the past with the present and hopefully the future. But right now we are in murky waters. Certainly we are unsure about where we will go next in terms of what it means to be a man and woman. There doesn't seem to be any promising theory at hand, especially when it comes to queer theory, which is the destroying of tradition, the destroying and questioning of what is and was. Now, I argue that tradition has much to talk to us about and teach us about. It has a lot to relay in the wisdom of the ages, and particularly that man has an essence as masculine and women as feminine. And although there may be variances in terms of cultures and predisposition, even for myself as a more effeminate male myself, I truly believe that what makes me a man has to do with primarily the gonads and sexual reproductive functions of the body. We are embodied creatures in a world where we are being disembodied, told this lie that we have to be and assume our moral authority in depicting what society should look like based on our preferences. You can blame someone for misgendering you. You can blame someone for being homophobic or transphobic because you exist as your own moral authority. Why? Because we don't listen to other people. We don't believe that anyone else is our authority. And we have broken the social contract, not between us and government, but between each other. We have divorced ourselves from other people, other tribes, other groups of individuals. And this sad reality is that we have to mend and reconcile within ourselves what it means to be human apart from one another. And that is a very lonely existence, in my opinion. So we need to be able to have conversations again about what do the traditionalists teach us and what are the new issues that face our day-to-day. And that can be seen, especially on the fringes of our society, the more extreme parts of our society that are the most entertaining to watch, especially when we think about politics, the social gender areas and racial areas. We have to understand that it's not simply about what we don't have or what we do have, those who have not and those who don't have, but rather what makes us all human. Ultimately, we can come together and say, you are my equal. And as a Christian, I truly believe that is a Judeo-Christian value that has no other comparison or counterpart that is more true, that is more likely to be true. Buddhism, atheistic humanism, and other thoughts cannot arrive to that in a more concrete way with more authority than any other worldview. And so Christianity, given my life experiences and other people's writings, whether it be C.S. Lewis, Augustine, have proven to be true time and time again. We are living in a disordered world and we need order. And there can only be one that gives order to the world, namely God. What do you guys think about the reality that we're living in today, where everything feels like it's run amok? We don't have social cohesion. We can't use the same terms anymore. We continue to come up with these new fads and new trends, new ideas, because ultimately we have displaced God. J.K. Chesterton, I love always quoting him. He said that when we do away with God, it's not that we will believe in nothing, as an atheist might say or believe. Rather, we will believe in everything and anything. We have become gullible to our vices and our pretenses and our desires. But ultimately, reality will crush us if we are not willing to reconcile our behaviors to a moral reality beyond ourselves. And this is where the conversation begins again. I can't wait to be able to share more conversations in the future. And I hope that this has revealed some things about where our society has taken us in terms of discourse, the lack thereof, more or less. And ultimately, we continue to be siloed in these veins of thinking about feminism, LGBTQ issues, race, simply because people have looked at the other as detestable. We need to reconcile these views again, and it's through discourse. Hey there, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. I hope you found it eye-opening and refreshing. And if you want to be able to support the work that I do, go to my Patreon page, as well as any of the social links below to follow me. Make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and